Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Privilege for me to introduce to you tonight our speaker who hails from Morrison, Colorado. Please give a warm welcome to Andrew.
Get myself situated here. Good evening, family. My name's Andrew. I'm an alcoholic. My only remaining character defect is excessive humility. You're in for a treat. Oh, this is going to be weird, guys. I'm like jacked on cold medicine. This is going to be fun. I have no idea where this is going to go, but hey, we'll have fun, right? I want to take a second and say thank you to the host committee for putting on a wonderful event. Can we give them a round of applause? These things take a lot of energy and a lot of inventory to put on, and hopefully you all have still remained friends at the end. No, it's actually through participating and putting on these types of events that I'm here. Because the gentleman who asked me to speak, Mike, he and I actually met through Alcoholics Anonymous service, putting on young people in AA events in the Four Corners region, where we were sort of collaborating with groups of young people in AA and doing campouts and going to Lake Powell and cliff diving and just doing a bunch of stupid crap and enjoying our lives sober. And so thank you, Mike, for hosting me and for the invitation to come and speak with you all. And thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for introducing me to people like him who continue to inspire me to be a better man and to be an active participant in Alcoholics Anonymous with the enthusiasm that I have for it today. I also want to say thank you to Daniel for last night. Let's give him another round of applause. Is he still in here? I think I saw him. Is he hiding back there? There he is. I enjoyed that. He and I met at a conference a couple years back too, and he's from Tucson, and I fell in love with the Tucson AA people as soon as I met them the very first time, and there's a deep love for the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous that exists in that particular place. And every time I've gone to meetings there and I meet people from Tucson, I just get really excited because they have this like sort of special energy to them that's really attractive to me. So again, thank you for last night. I enjoyed that a lot. I didn't get loaded till I was 11. I waited as long as I possibly could. I'm from Colorado, and my parents, my dad was he's the oldest of 5 kids from Alabama, and his father was a medic in the Marines in World War II in the Pacific, and when he came back, he became a Presbyterian minister, and he did that for the rest of his life. Married his high school sweetheart, had 5 kids, and so my dad grew up in the church, but he was the agnostic that just couldn't wait to get away from the South and away from religion. My mother was from the Midwest, a nice Swedish lady, descendant of Swedish immigrants. Sweetheart, she almost smoked a cigarette once, she's as straight as they get. And my dad had left home and partied and, played in a band and then went back and went to college for, 10 years and became a psychiatrist and did the whole physician heal thyself route from his party days. And he was recording the church choir at my grandfather's church, and my mom had moved to Birmingham and was singing in the choir. So, that was how they met. My dad had been to Colorado one time when he was a kid in a station wagon driving through the mountains. And they kept breaking down as they were driving. You know, they had 5 kids and the parents in this station wagon going to Disneyland or something. And he just kept looking at the mountains and going, I'm going to go back here one day. My mom had never been. And so they got married when my dad graduated medical school, and they just moved to Colorado and had me and my sister there. And so I was raised there, and you know, Colorado is home. Got a lot going on in my life today, guys, so I may get a little bit heavy sometimes. I apologize for that ahead of time. That plus the cold medicine, I don't know what's going to happen. So anyway, you know, my parents split up when I was about 7. And when I was a kid growing up, we would go back and we would visit my grandparents on the farm in Alabama, and we'd go to church and we'd sing like 5-part harmonies of like hymns before meals and stuff. And then we'd go, you know, have like these beautiful experiences with my family and with God. And then we'd go home. And the first time that my sister and I said we didn't want to go to Sunday school, my dad pulled us out of church and would never let my mom take us ever again. It was a big part of the disunion between my mother and my father, who split up when I was about 7 or 8. And so I started bouncing back and forth between them. It was this vicious, like, 5-year separation where, you know, my sister and I were sort of used as the weapon against each other, and they just couldn't stand each other. And to this day, cannot even really be in the same room together comfortably. It was just nasty and ugly. And that whole bouncing around part, I had this, you know, desire to want to impress my father. I lived with him for a time in elementary school. 5th grade, I was the kid that woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and ate my breakfast and grabbed a flashlight and walked to school and got there before anybody else got there. My teacher would show up early and bring me donuts. I'd water her plants, get all my classwork done before school started, and then I would help everybody else all day. I was that kid. And you know, I remember I got like a 98% or something, and my dad was just like, there's no reason you shouldn't get 100% on everything. You're the smartest kid in that class. It's like I had this very strong, demanding, perfectionist father that no matter what I did, it was never quite good enough for him. And so then when I went to live with my mom and my stepdad and now my 3 older stepbrothers in Denver the following year, I just sort of felt out of place. And I hung out with the other kids that felt out of place. And, you know, those kids had older brothers that played in death metal bands and drank whiskey and had mohawks. And, you know, I was like, oh, man, they're cool. I mean, they came in the room and, like, everything changed. There was, like, a fear about, like, what were these guys going to do next? They had control over the room as soon as they walked in. And I didn't, like, consciously think that. All I knew is I don't know, maybe it's something like growing up with a psychiatrist father. I'm very analytical, and I read people and I read their energy and I adapt really well. And I just sort of like, I wanted that, you know? I wanted to be the guy, because I was an awkward kid and I was really sensitive. And that was like the opposite of that, you know? That was, they had this shield between them and the rest of the world. And so I thought for sure that meant like I needed to listen to death metal and I needed to drink booze. So I bought, you know, like some metal records and cassette tapes.
Be kind.
They were cassettes. I had a Walkman. I was cool. And grew my hair out long. And, you know, I broke into my parents' liquor cabinet and I found like the coolest looking bottle I could find. It was this like teardrop shaped bottle of triple orange brandy. You always hear one person just kind of go, ugh, whenever I say that. Yeah. 11 years old, and what the hell do I know? I just grabbed the brandy because it looked cool. And I go back to my room with my crappy little waterbed and, you know, my black light posters and stuff, and put on like White Zombie or something. And I start taking sips off of this brandy. It's just disgusting, absolutely disgusting. I probably spent 2 hours just taking these little tiny sips off of this stuff that's just worse than any cough medicine I've ever had. I don't feel anything. It tastes gross, and I just don't get it. And I realized I probably need to, like, take a drink of this stuff to, like, get this effect that everybody seems to care about. So alone in my room with this brandy, I just took this giant chug off of this bottle. And I swear to God, it was just like the craziest burning feeling. I thought I was going to vomit. I forced myself not to. And I started to kind of choke that down. That burning moved into my chest and over the top of my head and down to the bottoms of my toes and my fingertips. And I was very, very comfortable in that crappy little waterbed. And I had no intention on moving. I can say without a doubt that I had a type of a spiritual experience from the effect that alcohol had on me from the very first time. If you read the Appendix 2 in our big book, The Spiritual Experience, it describes spiritual experiences as a type of a change, a rearrangement within us, a transformation, upheavals. It uses all these different change references. And what it's saying, in effect, is that the purpose of the 12-step program is to like try to help to affect a spiritual change from within us. Later on after getting sober, I've read some of the stuff that like Bill wrote back and forth and like talking with Carl Jung and like what his views were on alcoholism as a spiritual illness. This idea that like the true alcoholic, really the way that they desperately were drinking was a way of desperately seeking a connection to God. And I can say without a doubt that the transformation I had as a result of that first effect that alcohol had upon me was an out-of-body spiritual experience and something that I felt the need to chase from that moment on. I got the courage to have another chug because of how much I liked that effect, and then another. And then the waterbed started moving when I didn't want it to. The room and the blacklight posters were like twisting and spinning in ways that I wasn't comfortable with. I stumbled down the hallway and I fire hose vomited across the mirror and passed out. And I came to in my bed the next day, and my first thought was like, oh God, I'm going to get found out. And so I kind of like crept down the hall into the bathroom, and I walked in there, and my mom had cleaned it all up. Or somebody had, I assume it was her. And nobody ever said anything. She had this like really great thing where my dad was responsible for everything, and my mom bought into that. So you know how they were using us as a weapon against each other? Well, if I'm really honest, I started to manipulate that situation too. And I took full advantage of the idea that I could blame my father for everything because I was never good enough for him anyway. So, and my poor mother, who just, sweet, sensitive, sort of naive to a lot of things, mother, was easy to manipulate. So everything was my dad's fault. So all the stuff that I did for the next few years were really blamed on me having a jerk of a father. By the end of that school year, I was in the alternative class for kids with behavioral problems and learning disabilities, where they would only keep us in school for about 3 hours because they knew that we couldn't stand it much longer than that. And I had gone into 6th grade taking high school math and science classes. And by the end of that year, I had already been to jail twice and was, carrying weapons and grew my hair out and was drinking on a very regular basis. And we were competitive drinkers, There's something about just being a kid and being an idiot and being a drunk is that, we had like chugging contests, we'd get, steal a bottle of Everclear and like see how much you could chug of the bottle of Everclear, and I always had to win, right? Which meant we would do stupid stuff like, hey, there's a crane with like a flag on the top of it. Let's like climb up and get the flag, hammered. And I remember literally doing that and slipping probably 200 feet in the air and like catching onto the side of this crane and hanging there while the thing just spins and spins and spins. And my other two friends just sort of like, asked if I was okay before they went the rest of the way up and got the flag and came back down. And I think about that kind of stuff, like we'd be on top of, like parking garages, drinking whiskey, singing the Doors songs, like walking on the edge of like 6-story buildings. It's just like something happened in me when I started drinking that like I just became a completely different person, completely uninhibited, able to just release myself out and be and do whatever I wanted. And, damn world just kept getting in the way, like school and like family and having to like grow up cops. Cops just loved me. I knew all the cops in my neighborhood by the time I was 14. I knew their first name. They knew my birthday. When I was 13, I went back with my dad to go visit my family in the South. And, so I've got like long hair and I'm wearing like a pentagram around my neck because I'm an idiot, and listening to death metal and stuff to go see like my religious family in Birmingham. And, we go to the farm, and damned if like all of them weren't just totally sweet to me the whole time. No judgment. They didn't care. They knew I was a teenager. But my dad, God, he was just so uncomfortable the whole time. He was building this resentment. And, when we were on our way back, we got into an argument. I went out to smoke a cigarette when we were catching flights through Chicago. And of course, on the way back through security, it took forever and we missed the flight. And my dad just went to the bar and he drank until we took our flight and flew back to Denver. We get off the plane and he says something about carrying his bag. I tell him to carry his own effing bag. We got into like this like little fist fight in the middle of the airport, and he said, I'm done with you. And basically my dad said, when you're ready to act right, we can talk again. And I didn't talk to him again until I was 19. So the next 6 years I had every excuse in the world, and I took it all out of my mom. Poor, sweet, wonderful mother. I took that if you're afraid of me, I have control over you mentality, and I turned it right on my mother, and she just didn't get in my way. I would be gone for weeks at a time. The cops would pick me up, bring me home. She wouldn't mention that I was a runaway. She didn't want to get me in the system. I didn't go to school. I was constantly arrested and going to jail. I became a burglar. I became a drug dealer. I started hanging out with very dangerous people. I started carrying guns and knives. And I would show up to my mother's house with gang members in the suburbs, and we'd just like go hang out and smoke weed and drink beer in the backyard. I'm like a 14, 15-year-old kid hanging out with like adults at my mom's house, and she was just so scared of me that she just didn't do anything. Just awful what I did to that woman. And anyway, as I grew up through that stuff, the progressive nature of my illness exhibited itself in more exaggerated and dangerous ways as I continued to test the limits. I left home when I was 15. I went to a couple of treatment centers. I was going to be committed to a juvenile detention facility for a few years, and instead my parents found it in their heart to find a way to send me to some, outward bound style of ranch treatment program in Utah. So my mom paged me. There you go. It goes along with the cassettes. She paged me, and I called her back, and she says, your probation officer is going to be here in the morning, so you got to come home. So I came home about 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. these guys come breaking into the room, and they say, grab your clothes. We're taking you to Utah. They take me out to this place, and they shave your head and scream in your face, and by the end of it, you're like taking care of a horse and stuff. And I put on some weight. I looked real good talking to girls and stuff while I was in there. I felt pretty good about myself. And, I really had no intention of going back to that life. But, man, as soon as I was home, I kind of missed my friends. And I just went and hung out with my friends. And, it wasn't days. I was back to doing the same thing. And some of my family regretted that. They said, well, your father didn't want to pay for you to stay for another month. And the treatment center said you needed at least another month. I'd been there for like 4 months or something. They were like, give him another month. He said, I'm not paying for it. And they were mad at him about it. And they said, well, if you'd have done that, he'd have been okay. I was like, I don't think so. I just don't. And at the end of the day, I actually learned some really great skills from that place that carried with me for, till today. So I try to encourage my parents, no, don't regret that. That was a good thing. I might have died in that period of time. I don't know. Maybe all the treatment centers and all the times I was locked up were just, some sort of an intervention between me and certain death. But after I came back from that, I tried going back to school again, but eventually I just left because, every school I went to, I became the kid that people were afraid of. Columbine happened while I was 15 or 16, and, I had a trench coat and carried guns. So needless to say, the kids who knew about that weren't coming to school. And they told the school, and so the school pulled me in and they said, we've decided that we're going to let you finish the school year today. Because they couldn't really expel me for being an idiot with a trench coat, that scared people. So they just kind of said, we're going to let you finish the year. And that was it. I was like, cool, that's it. I don't really need to go to school anyway. So I left home. By the time I was 19, I'd been stabbed and shot at. Friends were murdered, some of them in front of me. Lots have died. The horror of my life was normal. I treated a lot of the behaviors competitively in the same way that I treated my drinking. It was all ego. And I became extremely, extremely violent. And I'm a sensitive kid. I'm not a violent guy. I'm not a tough guy. But I was always the tall kid and the lanky one, and I was always a good target. And so I learned how to fight real quick, and I just learned how to go really psychotic really fast and scare people. And so that's just kind of what I did. I figured out how I could scare people the most. I grew out dreadlocks and got a bunch of piercings, and I just became like a wild animal. And I left Colorado when I was 19 with this hippie chick. She was a lesbian, but I took care of that. We'd been friends since I was like... I'm sorry, I should really apologize. I shouldn't do that. I told you this cold medicine, man. Who knows what's going to happen? God, she was beautiful too, man. And... poetic and like this just like hip hop MC and and she knew all these hippie kids, and I was just like, I like hippies. She said, let's go to San Francisco, and I was like, okay, I'll follow you anywhere. And so I just became a serial monogamist from then on out, I swear. But no, I was with that girl for like the rest of my drinking. She was crazy. I'll push past the beautiful, intelligent women for the psychopath in the back. It was like a magnet. And, so we took, the couple hippies and a dog and, put them in my Honda Civic hatchback with the speakers with the long cable so I could put them on top while we were camping, and went to San Francisco. And that was my escape from the violent world that I was living in. Well, it turns out that San Francisco, even the hippies are violent and crazy. And, man, it got really crazy there, drinking hot whiskey out of plastic bottles in the park with these gutter punks, and all the, San Francisco is just this weird cultural amalgamation of all the psychopaths, It's like they all just sort of congregate in these different areas and just feed off each other and do the craziest stuff. God, it was just the competitive nature of my psychotic, center just exploded, and I became just this whole new being. I got arrested there, and I was looking at going to prison. I'm 19 years old. I got dreadlocks, and I'm 140 pounds and just psychotic. And they take me to this jail called San Bruno. It's a classification center in the Bay Area where they take all the felons and they kind of figure out, which prison they're going to send them to. Are they going to send them to Folsom or Chino, and which gang are they affiliated with? And I'm one of 6 white guys in this whole thing, right? And the first night I'm there, one of the white guys fights with a couple of Mexican gang members and loses the fight. And the guy that won the fight goes to the holding cell where the marshals just beat the hell out of him until the flight for life or whatever, the helicopter came and had to take him to the hospital. And the guy that lost the fight hung himself. And then I meet the other white guy in my pod, and he's telling me how he just he finished his year for the exact same charge that I got. And I'm going, yeah, I'm screwed. So I opened the Bible, and I thought, okay, God, I'm going to read this whole thing. And just don't send me to San Quentin or Folsom, please. I swear I'll never do this again. And they take me for my sentencing, right, at about 6:30 in the morning. And they put 40 of us in this holding cell, the size of this stage. and they say America's been attacked. 2 planes were on their way to California, and they turn around and hit these buildings in New York. The TransUnion building is right next door to the courthouse. So they said, the second largest financial target in our country is right next door. So we're evacuating the building. And for half a second in my narcissistic mind, I thought maybe that, that's how God was going to let me out. No, they don't let the inmates out when they evacuate. They just tell you the building could come down at any minute, and then they leave. Like the bus drivers are gone. Everybody's gone for like 6 hours. Which didn't end well for the guys who are Middle Eastern descent who were in the pod. I just ended up kind of huddled over by the little steel toilet while things got worse and worse, and just had this flashback to when I was a kid and I used to walk to school at 5 a.m. I specifically remember that, like sitting there and just, for some reason, it just popped in my head. And then I remembered like going to visit my grandparents in the South and pretending to be a cow on the farm and stuff, my cousins. And I'm like, how the hell did I end up here? I'm going to be different this time. If I get out of here sane and alive, like, I'm going to do things different. In Bill's story, he talks about how he had this business deal that he'd put together, and so he wasn't going to drink. And what happens is that he still goes out to hang out with his friends anyway. And they start passing this bottle by him. It comes by him, and he says, "No, I'm good, guys. I got this thing I got to do tomorrow." And they say, "You sure? That's a fine bottle of Applejack." He says, Yeah, I'm good. Bottle keeps going around. By the time it gets to him, he goes, "Well, I've never actually tried Applejack, so I should at least try it, right?" And then he takes this one drink, and he goes on a prodigious bender, and the chance vanishes, and he wakes up the next day, and he goes, "God, I can't even have just like one drink." And I have in my book this little note that says, like, that's the moment of clarity. And people have different ways of interpreting it. But for me, what it was the moment that I realized that, like, this wasn't anymore a choice for a lifestyle that I was enjoyed. I was doing something that was beyond my mental control. When I was released from that jail, I ended up not going to prison. I don't remember how long I was there. It was a couple months. In that San Bruno County jail, but I didn't go to prison. And I'll never forget it when they told me to roll my mat up, and I was going to get out. My very first thought was where I could go on Haight Street to buy a 32-ounce blueberry bomber, because I just needed a beer, because this was stressful. Damn, that was stressful. America's attacked, all this crazy stuff. I just need a beer, and then I got to go find my girlfriend who's like living in the bush where I left her, and like, right? And like 9 months later, I was in jail in Seattle for the same thing, and I looked back and I was like, damn, that all happened because I had that one beer. Well, and then I had to find a girlfriend. So, maybe they were both bad, but I just kind of knew it from that moment. I sat in that jail in King County Jail where they had the black and white stripes and everything. I'd never been to a jail that actually still had that. I thought it was a joke. I had the stripes on, and I just like looked at myself in the mirror, and I just knew, at a certain point I had thought that this was fun, but this wasn't fun anymore. This was now my life, and I didn't know how it was going to stop. I reconnected with my father. I tried to live with him and go to college full time and I'm going to work really hard and impress him. So I got a job at the Harley dealership. I started going to college full time. And I was doing intensive outpatient treatment where this guy suggested that perhaps I ought to go to a meeting. And I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Dreadlocks, skinny, psychotic, walk into this meeting. And I don't know, I said some crazy stuff, and somebody told me to, like, stop talking. And I was really upset by that. And I stayed through the rest of the meeting, and I stood outside with my arms crossed, chain smoking cigarettes, staring at them, wondering why none of them wanted to talk to me. But it's funny that, like, if that fear projected on others controls my environment stuff, it worked on you too. It kept you away from me. And it might have been smart for you at that time, because I was not approachable. And anyway, I think I made it through like half a semester of school before I was back with that girlfriend living on the street in Denver and just robbing people at the bus station. She'd go off during the day. She started working at a strip club. It turned into her working as an escort, and then she just started working the street. We'd just wake up during the day. We'd go our separate ways. We'd rob people. She'd do her thing. I'd steal, sell drugs, break into people's cars, whatever I had to do to survive. I took a lot of other drugs too at the same time. I drank every day religiously. But, you know, I would go into the blackout on Tuesday. I'd come out on Saturday. I wouldn't know where I'd been. I was 132 pounds at 6'4", and I lived that way for a couple more years. I hid stuff in the pockets in shorts underneath my pants. I dropped something once, and so every few steps I kind of shuffled. I looked behind me like a chicken just clucking around in the street. People literally crossed the street to avoid me, and the worst part of it was I saw it and I knew it. My mother would occasionally come downtown and bring me a bag full of peanut butter sandwiches, and she would just cry and give me $20 in a bag of sandwiches and then go home. And I just sort of surrendered to the idea that I was going to die there. I had a stroke one day. I didn't know I had a stroke. I just knew I was walking across the street and half my body went paralyzed. And I sort of hopped onto the bus and went back to my hotel room, this little crappy hotel room, and just sat there sipping hot whiskey out of a bottle with tears in my eyes because I was running out, and I didn't know if my body was going to unlock enough for me to be able to walk to the liquor store. And in the hospital a couple weeks later, they asked if I'd ever had any kind of temporary paralysis. I explained what I'd had. They ran some blood tests. They said, yeah, you had a stroke. I just drank my way through it. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our stories are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. But we find opportunities to laugh, and why shouldn't we laugh? We've recovered. We've been given the power to help others. I realize that a lot of the things about my story separate me more than they connect me to other people, and I apologize for that. I've dealt with that a lot in AA, where the more I talk about the truth of the suffering that I felt, the more people feel like, well, maybe they're not an alcoholic because they didn't go that far. The nice thing about alcoholism is it's a progressive illness, and if you can find yourself anywhere on the spectrum and you can feel within your heart that you were truly powerless over the substance, the amount of suffering that you felt is irrelevant. But the reason that I tell the truth in the core of my suffering is because when I first came to AA, I didn't hear it. It took a long time. I got moved into an apartment building, and I had my first of 2 heart attacks, and I'd had a stroke, and then these guys just sort of said, hey, we're going to pay for an apartment for you in this housing program for street kids. And you know, the people that were staying sober there went to meetings, so I went to meetings, and I hung out in the back with my hood up, had my arms crossed, and I walked outside early, and I stole money from the basket regularly to buy cigarettes, and I just, everything you guys said, I hated it. I hated every word out of your mouth, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. And then there'd be these people, just bizarre, you know, they would come up and they would say like, hi, how are you? I'd be like, what? And they wouldn't sit me down and try to figure me out and bring their book out and, you know, try to 12-step me to death, you know. They were just kind, which I wasn't used to. And then some of them started to remember my name. And they'd say, hi, Andrew, it's nice to see you again. So I just kept coming. It was your kindness that gave me a home. It wasn't the little 3 to 5 minute drive-by shooting that you do in a meeting where you try to sound real good. It was your kindness that made me feel like I was okay to be here. And then one day, I heard this guy in a meeting, and he had about 3 years sober, and he talked about drinking whiskey with tears in his eyes, not wanting to do it anymore. He talked about not wanting to go into the hospitals because of the way that the doctors treated him. He talked about not being able to look at his mother in the eyes anymore not because she didn't love him, but because she couldn't stand the way that she looked at him anymore. He talked about loneliness in a way that made sense to me, and I didn't even realize how lonely I'd been for so long. But that guy, when he opened his mouth, it was just like, oh my God, somebody feels like I do. August 21st of 2005, I'd been coming around Alcoholics Anonymous for a period of time. I'd spent the better part of 8 years homeless. I'd had a heart attack and a stroke. I'd been stabbed. I was staying sober, short little stints, and coming to AA and not really saying anything, but getting some phone numbers. And I had I'd gotten a girlfriend because she was in the treatment center down the street, so obviously that was meant to be. And I got a sponsor because he had long hair, and I saw him at a concert, so that was also a good choice. The girlfriend drank. She was like trying to jump out of my car and stuff and slitting her wrists in my bathroom, so I thought, it's probably not the best thing, and for her sobriety's sake, I should let her go. So she slept with my sponsor to get back at me. For those of you who are new and don't have a sponsor yet, you're supposed to want what the sponsor has. He seemed to want what I had. I don't know. Unfortunately, he got it. Poor guy. He had like 5 years sober. He went out, and he's still out. Sad. I hear about him sometimes shuffling around in the street. People see him. But, I woke up one day after all that stuff happened, and I just wanted to drink. I was about 5.5 months sober. I'd sort of going to AA. I'd had that sponsor. It didn't really work out. And I wanted to drink. And, there's a funny thing about alcoholism. We describe the center of our illness as the alcoholic mind. We describe it as a mental obsession. And sometimes we limit ourselves by saying that alcoholism is if once you start, you can't stop, and once you stop, you can't stop thinking about it, then you're probably one of us. Well, it's just not really accurate. I could stop and not think about it. I think my biggest weakness was that whenever that thought, I want to drink now, came in, I just drank every time. And I woke up that morning, man, I wanted to drink. And I knew it was a bad idea, and I'd gotten a job and a car, and I just graduated this program. I was about to move out and get my own place. I was starting to put a life back together. But I just wanted to drink. And as soon as that thought crept in, the definition of the word obsession is the thought or feeling that outweighs all others. All the way to the liquor store, I'm fighting it, looking at the numbers on my phone. I shouldn't do this. I know where this is going to lead. But I had to drink, and it did exactly what I wanted it to do. Weight of the world's off my shoulders in about 7 seconds. That's never going to change for me. I know that. I know exactly the effect that alcohol has upon me, which is why if I don't have some sense of ease and comfort through a spiritual way of life, I will most certainly turn back to that one thing that I know will give me ease and comfort. Were it not for the fact that I can't stop at the ease and comfort, I probably would have stayed out for much longer. August 21st of 2005, I was on the end of a 2-month bender that started from that drink. I'd been going to meetings the whole time because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I just went there drunk. And I tried to kill myself with about a half a liter of vodka and 90 milligrams of temazepam, a quarter gram of heroin, and a gram of cocaine shoved in my arm. And I showed up I woke up, came to in the emergency room, and the doctor said, Mister, if you hadn't done that amount of cocaine, that amount of heroin and alcohol and temazepam would have killed you. And if you hadn't done that heroin and alcohol and temazepam, that amount of cocaine would have killed you. But the two brought your heart rate up and down long enough for you to get here. And then you flatlined. You were dead for 30 seconds, and we brought you back. All I could think was, God, I can't even die right, man. I surrendered there in the hospital. I had nothing left. I had no fight left. I had no ideas left. There was no more hustle left in this hustler. I had nothing left to do but to shuffle over into the freaking room where the TV was on fall precautions, because every few steps I took, I'd just slide over and take a digger into the wall. So they had this bright yellow bracelets that said, "Watch him," as he walks down the hall. And shuffle into this other room, and Hurricane Katrina was happening. I thought maybe the world would come to an end. And I looked up, and the steps and traditions were hanging on the wall on either side of the TV, and I said, you know what? I've never given myself 100% to this thing. I'm going to do all 12 steps, and if it doesn't work, I'm just going to put a bullet in my head. I surrendered completely right then to the idea that I was going to give everything I had to Alcoholics Anonymous because I didn't have anything else to lose. And so then I got up and I shuffled my way back to my room. And I said, whatever the F is good in listening, please help me because I don't know what to do. It was the first time I had a prayer that wasn't, God, let me get in the house to get some stuff and my mom not be there. God, let me not go to prison in San Quentin, and I promise I'll never do this. It wasn't a negotiation. It was just help me. Just help me. And about 30 minutes later, I was walking from one side of the hospital to the other, and I looked up, and that guy that I'd met in the meeting that one time who'd shared about drinking with tears in his eyes, not wanting to do it anymore, well, just guess who was wearing hospital scrubs working in that psych unit. And he looked at me and he said, "Way to go!" And he went for a high five. Thanks. Jerk. I would ask that man for help, and I believe that that was the beginning of my true spiritual journey. Sure, I surrendered to the idea that I was going to do Alcoholics Anonymous. Lots of us make a decision to do a lot of stuff, but we still don't ask for help. The moment I became humble enough to ask another man for help and willing to follow direction, I was set on a path that would completely transform my life and introduce me to some really wonderful people, give me the opportunity to spend time with, you crazy people. And I had no idea what I was signing up for at the time. But that man said, sure, I'd be happy to help you. Why don't you start calling me twice a day? You're going to need to get a brand new 4th edition hardback copy of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, a copy of our book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, a dictionary, a pen, and a highlighter. And if you ever show up to my house without all of those things, then we're not going to meet. I thought that was a little serious. He shows up to the hospital the next day and says, "Why didn't you call?" I said, "Well, I'm still in the hospital. You work here, man." He said, "I didn't tell you to start calling me when you got out." You need to start calling me, man. And he was like, "Dude, there's like a 2-year-long inpatient treatment program. Have you considered doing that?" And by that time, I'd spent 2.5 years of my life in some sort of a jail institution or treatment or recovery center. I was done with treatment. I just looked at him and I said, "Nah, man, I want to do this. I just want to do AA, and I just want to live my life." And he said, "Okay." He didn't fight me on it. He just was suggesting that perhaps I should be locked up for a few years before being allowed out with, earthlings and such. But I chose instead to sit in that guy's living room. And, I met with him that first time, and he said, "All right, show me the first page of your book." And I show him. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm real smart. It's going to be the one that says Alcoholics Anonymous on it." He goes, "Nope. It's the blank one right before that." I said, "Okay." He says, "Now I want you to write what I know about keeping myself clean and sober at the top of that page." And I said, "You want me to write everything I know?" He said, "No. I want you to write what I know about keeping myself clean and sober at the top of that blank page." I said, "Okay." So I write that sentence. And then he says, "Now I want you to tell me what you know." And I wasn't catching the setup. I just walked right into it. I'm like, "Well, my dad's a psychiatrist who's a board-certified addiction psychiatrist, and I've been in therapy since I was 7 years old, and I've been to all these different treatment centers, and I've been around AA." Isn't that always your favorite? Well, how long have you been sober? Well, I've been around AA for 12 years. So you've been, sober like 30 days? I've been around AA for all this time. So I guess what works and what doesn't work is what I know. Excuse my language. He said, "We're going to stick with you don't know shit. Because whatever it is that you think you know has led you here without any solution for permanent recovery." And then he softened up a little bit and he said, "Why wouldn't you want to just start with a clean slate?" Then he said, now turn to that next page, and it says Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, right where I can go to learn at the top of that. And then we turned to the title page. It says Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. He said, now circle that word recovered and write page 85 underneath it. And we turned to page 85 in the book. It says, we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We'll seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally. We will find that this has happened automatically. It just comes. He said, Andrew, if we take all the directions, this is a textbook. If we follow the instructions from where we are at the front cover of this, as we go through and I read this book to you and we share our experiences together and we take the steps that are outlined in this book, by the time you reach this, I can promise you that the problem will have been removed. Yeah, you'll have other problems, but the problem will be removed. And he said, and I know that because it's true for me. And I don't know, I just never heard that put quite that way from someone who I felt like he certainly had the same problem that I did. You know, it talks about that in our literature, right? Like, Alcoholics Anonymous is built on this idea that our shared common suffering is the one thing that allows an alcoholic to let his guard down and approach something with real willingness. You know, Dr. Bob, he'd been involved in the Oxford groups for 2 years. The same spiritual principles were available to him. He could not gain access to what we have to offer until he was approached by a man who sat across from him, and as soon as he looked at him, he knew the suffering that he felt, and through his actions and his words, or the way that he talked about his own suffering, Dr. Bob's guard just melted away. Alcoholics Anonymous is built on that. And it's why I don't talk about the drugs part of my story, because it's irrelevant here. I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous because I'm an alcoholic, not a drug addict who did, drugs alcoholically. I just don't think that's a real thing. I apologize if that offends you. But the reality is I sponsor guys who are like real alcoholics, who are young guys who never did drugs, who are surrounded by drug addicts in AA. And they feel like because they didn't do drugs, they don't belong in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm sorry, but that's messed up. It's messed up. We identify through our common suffering. Our suffering. And the suffering from alcoholism is different from the suffering from heroin addiction, which is different from the suffering from sex addiction, which is why this isn't Anything Goes Anonymous. Sorry, I'm going to get off the soapbox now and back to my story. As I entered onto the path of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, first step for me was the admission of true powerlessness. And powerlessness means that human power is insufficient, that I couldn't learn the problem away. I couldn't do what my dad did and go to college for 10 years and learn the problem away. I couldn't just come to Alcoholics Anonymous and learn how to share in a meeting for 3 to 5 minutes and then I'd be okay. What it meant was that I had to find something else as a substitute, because of myself, I would never have the power to stay sober permanently, to deal with that part of my brain that would say drinking is a definite. Not a good idea. Notice I didn't say that. That last time I drank, I knew it was a bad idea. I just wanted to feel different right now. And knowing it was a bad idea didn't matter, right? I needed a solution that was greater than my brain. And, so that's why I told you guys a little bit about the God experiences that I'd had. My truth is that I didn't have any resentment toward organized religion, but I grew up in an agnostic family with a super detail-oriented brain and a highly analytical father. And so it's just part of my nature that I pick things apart a lot. And so it was always just very hard for me to embrace anybody else's idea of God, because I could always just try to analyze it too much and it would just make my head crazy. So I really struggled with that piece. But my sponsor said the most simple thing to me. He said, what if God is a verb? Mother Teresa talked about that. She lost, when she was working with people with wet leprosy in India, she saw suffering that basically none of us will ever understand. And she lost faith in God. She felt God asked her to do that work, but she lost faith in God. But she didn't stop helping those people. She continued to love the unlovable, touch the untouchable. And it was through loving them that she rediscovered God. And that was where this idea of where there is love, there is God came from for her. Right? And so I was sort of introduced to this idea that, like, what if there's a way of acting my way into connecting to the Spirit? And most importantly, I was told that by step 2, I really didn't have to have a concept of God that made sense to me. All I really had to do was say, okay, so if I'm truly powerless, then the next obvious thing to say is that if there's a solution for me, then it has to be a power, and it has to be a power greater than me. So for me, it was as simple as saying, I believed that my sponsor, who I was sitting across from, had found a spiritual solution through taking the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believed that if it was possible for him to gain access to that power, that maybe it could happen for me too. And so in step 3, I made a decision that I was going to turn my will and my life over to the care of this God that I did not understand, that I believe lives in the space between people, and I'm most conscious of it when I'm here participating with you, that I was going to turn myself over to that by taking the action of doing the rest of the steps, by doing service work for Alcoholics Anonymous, by saying yes, by getting on my damn motorcycle and riding 750 miles with a freaking head cold through hail and snow to show up to see you crazy people, by just doing whatever God asked of me, because I don't know what he has on the other end of it for me. Just saying yes and having some blind faith. So I got into this inventory. And the inventory was an inventory of my grosser handicaps, of my mistakes, of my character defects. And for me, I found that the inventory was a really powerful exercise. I struggled with it. I sort of approached it with some enthusiasm, like I was going to finish it fast and write this really great inventory and everyone was going to be impressed. And then I struggled with it when I got there, because I am sort of the more melancholy type that it describes in the 12 and 12, that has that like desire to sort of use it as a weapon against myself. Some people don't have that same problem, but I really did. As I started to dig into that stuff, the mistakes that I had, my faults, they were just really glaring for me, and it was very uncomfortable. I didn't like to look at it, and I was very uncomfortable with the prospect of sharing that with another man. But, you know, again, we say this around here a lot, like the most important step's the one you're on. Do them in order. Don't worry about 5, just worry about 4. Put pen to paper, do what's in front of you. I did that. And then my car got stolen right after I finished my inventory. My inventory was in the car. It took me like 2 months to write that damn thing. I was so pissed. And so I whipped out that last one. And really, when I say 2 months, it was like 2 months of balking and like, 2 days of writing. Because that's how we do. I got to like clean the house or whatever. I got like stuff I got to do other than sit down and write. But I finished it, and then I sat down with my sponsor, and, we would sit and only read for a few hours at a time. It took a while for us to get through the 5th step. It was very revealing. We dug very, very deep to the root cause of all of my defects of character. And it was not peeling layers of the onion. It was like slicing the onion in half and exposing the core, right? And I didn't understand why, when I was talking with this man about this stuff, that like he would end up tearing up more than I was until I heard someone else expose themselves that vulnerably when I was listening to a 5th step. Then I realized that like when you really hear someone bearing out everything they've got and like really giving themselves to this thing, it's so powerful because they've got a chance. And I didn't leave anything out. Right to the very end, I had some stuff I didn't want to talk about, and I looked right at him and I said it all, I said the deep, ugly stuff, and we got into step 6 and 7, which are really the spiritual maturity steps, right? It says the difference between the men and the boys, or the women and the girls, is the difference between those who are willing to strive for God's perfect objective for them, or those who are just willing to settle for enough perfection of what will get them by in life. Defined, of course, by my version of perfection. And so, our speaker last night, he talked a little bit about the simplistic nature of the principle of those steps, and I believe in that wholeheartedly. The exercise that I was brought through was one where, as my sponsor was listening to my fifth step, he wrote down the character defects that he heard, and I would write down a few as well. And so I came out of it with a list of my character defects. And then what I did was I actually asked in prayer what the opposite of those were. And I built this spiritual ideal for my life that looked a lot like perfection. And when I sat in meditation and looked at those things, I saw for me, man, this is the stuff I've been holding on to. Here's my survival mechanisms, that I'm going to project this scary image onto the world so that I can control what you think about me before, you have a chance to hurt me. I don't trust anybody else on the planet, so I'm willing to lie and manipulate to get what I want. All those survival mechanisms that became my character defects, am I willing to let all that stuff go and become kind and loving and altruistic and all this fluffy stuff that's on the other end here? And my truth when I was in 6 and 7 was like, I don't really know how to get there, but I'm willing to try, and I'm willing to ask for help. And that was the best I could do. Example of the opposite of those things, not trusting people. The opposite of that isn't to trust everybody. The opposite of I don't trust anybody is to focus on being trustworthy. And the funny thing about becoming a trustworthy man is that you start to attract other trustworthy people to you. It's just bizarre how that happens, Water seeks its own level. In steps 8 and 9, I took the list of people that I'd harmed. I added a few names to the list. And I prayerfully re-examined what the harm was that I'd caused them, and I talked with my sponsor about what harm really is, so that I wasn't just sort of walking blindly into these things with people, shooting from the hip. And I was instructed that, we don't just sit in front of people and apologize, that the purpose of an amend is to commit to change and to acknowledge that I was wrong and give them the opportunity to say what they need to say. So I had this chance to go visit that ex-girlfriend. She'd been arrested for prostitution and assaulting a police officer. I'd heard that she was dead, and then a police officer that I worked with, I became a homeless outreach worker and started working on the street with people that had actually once been friends, and now I was on the other side of it. And so I knew some of these cops, and I'd been working with this group of sex workers on the street and knew that my ex-girlfriend was a part of that group, and said, hey, if anything ever happens with that girl, please let me know, because I need to have a conversation with her. So they set up a professional visit for me in the jail, and I went and sat with her just right as she's starting to get uncomfortable and get sick. And she described these times in blackouts when I would beat her up, things that I didn't remember, things I don't even know how much of it was she was telling the truth and how much of it she was just trying to hurt me. She described all this like really psychotic stuff and just poured the horror out of her life as she talked in this jail cell. And I made a commitment to that girl. I said, look, all I want you to know is that I found a solution and I found a space that works for me. And no matter what happens, I just want you to be able to have access to that same thing, whatever that looks like. And she asked me to keep in touch with her, so I did. And I wrote her letters, and I would go visit her, and I was the only sober friend that she had. And I picked her up from prison and took her to her mom's house. And on my 7-year birthday, she died of a heroin overdose. I went to her funeral, and as soon as I walked up to her mom just started bawling and fell in my arms. And that was it for me. That was about my 30th funeral since I got sober, from people that died from this disease. And I just said, you know what, I can't go to funerals for people that die from this anymore. It's too much for me. But I stood at her grave, and I knew I'd done everything I could on my side of the street to make sure she had access to the same solution. I sat with my mom, and I made amends to her. And when I was into the, if you have anything you'd like to say, it would help me, because I could never fully understand the harm I've caused you unless I hear it from you. She said, well, what do you remember? Good black belt codependent that she is, she just pulled out this mental list of stuff, and she talked for about 45 minutes. And I had the most powerful experience. When she was done, I was so grateful that she had said everything she had. And I said, thank you, Mom. I love you. And I want you to know that the man that's sitting here today is not the same kid that did those things to you. And this was the crazy part. I knew I was telling the truth. I wasn't lying. I wasn't sitting in front of my mom just telling her another story. It's going to be different this time. I felt different. That was the moment when I knew everything had really started to change. I have chased that feeling with the same enthusiasm that I chased my first drink ever since. I've never seen fit to stray away from you guys. I just never have. The 10th step tells me to continue to watch for fear to return, for the character defects to show up, not if, but when, to be honest with people about them, be accountable, make amends where harm is done, because this is about a way of life. This isn't an event that I graduate from. Step 11, as our speaker again so accurately portrayed last night, is about using some spiritual tools to continue to grow this now just new conscious relationship with God that I've developed as a result of taking the steps. I use prayer and meditation in a lot of different ways. I was telling some people earlier today, I had this sponsor for a while, this just beautiful Cherokee Indian man who we'd just ride up in his crappy convertible up to the mountains and go walk into a river and sit down and just find a space to just sit and talk or just sit quietly. And we sat quietly for about 30 minutes once, and he looked at me and he said, "Andrew, I want you to look around and pay attention to what you see and what do you hear, what do you smell, what do those rocks feel like underneath you?" He said, "You'll see me in a meeting a lot of times and I've got my eyes closed." He said, "I'm in one of these places." That's one of the most powerful meditations that I have, is I've got these places and these spaces, some that I've experienced with people, others that I've experienced on my own, that I've just had that chance to be able to stop and be mindful of the moment and take this little mental picture. And when I need to, I can just close my eyes and take a deep breath and go to that space. That's a way of connecting to me. Meditation is a way of sort of unconsciously connecting to the Spirit, and prayer is about sort of like consciously and like mindfully expressing my intention to connect to the Spirit. The 12th step says now that I'm spiritually awake as a result of taking the steps. It's my job, it's my responsibility to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to those who still suffer, and to practice these principles, these spiritual principles in all of our affairs. My favorite description of the 12 steps is in the foreword to the 12 and 12. It says, "The 12 steps are a set of principles spiritual in their nature, which if practiced as a way of life can expel the obsession to drink and make the sufferer happily and usefully whole." That is 100% what happened to this alcoholic. Life is not perfect. But even in the midst of the calamity, so long as I'm not the manufacturer of my own misery, I have the opportunity to let God demonstrate through me his omnipotence. I stand before you guys here today, almost 12 years sober, divorced, homeless, and unemployed. Push past the intelligent and beautiful ones for the psychopath in the back. I just spoke in South Dakota. I said that same thing. We went to eat with a bunch of people afterward, and this girl was at the end goes, "You realize as soon as you said that, you became the sexiest man at the conference, right?" She was like, "Will you come home with me? You can live in my closet." I'm like, "What the Silence of the Lambs shit over here." I mean, that's real though, you know? Like, I got married to somebody I met in sobriety, and it didn't work. And I had this career, and I built up this beautiful outlook, and it didn't work. And like last year, I lost a lot of things. And I went through a period of my sobriety where I struggled to pray. And I went to meetings and I felt like everybody was just parroting the same thing someone else before said, and none of it sounded authentic. And I wondered, had anybody questioned a conscious relationship with God in the way I'm questioning it now? Because you guys just sound so fluffy. I went through that with years of sobriety. It was very uncomfortable. But like I said, the idea of leaving here never came up. I've always been actively sponsored. You know, through that time, I had a sponsor, beautiful, amazing man, and 65 years old, he could do 40 pull-ups, and then all of a sudden he got a brain tumor and he was dead within 6 months. And I lost a lot of things. A lot of things have changed, and right now I've got all my things in storage, and I rode a motorcycle to come and spend time with you guys and carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just my reality. I still say yes when I'm asked. It's always an honor and a privilege to be with you all. Thank you for being a part of my spiritual journey.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.